Actually, it started out as being a poor man's porridge because on the farms they just ran out of food to make and they didn't have a lot of great staples. Some of it would be stored in their stuas, their stabbers, their little houses that they had for refrigeration. And then when the fish would go, after a long time, the fish would go bad or the meat would go bad, it would start warming up. And they were looking for ways to feed their families. And if they had a cow and they had milk, they would make a Rommegrot, which is a grut is like a porridge made with sour cream.
Hmm.
And they just their staples that would stay good would be like the cinnamons and the sugars, and the dry goods would stay a whole lot better than any of the perishables. So they made this porridge. Usually it was a Saturday night.
Hmm.
A Saturday night was the big important night, the family meal, Saturdays and Sundays, and they'd save the meat and whatnot for Sundays. And then they had the dried meats that they would serve with leftover dried meats that they had from the week for the Rumagrit. And it was a porridge made with just dairy and flour, and then they stirred it for hours and hours and hours, or at least an hour, and depending on if they had any access to electricity, which was unlikely. They had the wood burning stove, which is how they cooked it. And they made this big pot and they would stir it continuously to try and bring up the butter fat that's in the milk and the cream and the sour cream. And that would get tartar as they brought out more butter. Then it would be more like a sour cream taste as the butter fat that they drew off. And they would take the butter fat off of the rumagurt, pour the porridge into a bowl, and then throw a tablespoon or so over the top of the rumagrit because it would be quite thick, almost like a pudding texture. And
Mm.
then they would just sprinkle cinnamon and sugar over the top of that, and it was very filling. So
Right.
because it was filling, they would drink that, eat that for about, I don't know, maybe they'd eat whatever they had out of the pot, and it would fill you up real quickly. So they'd wait, and afterwards they'd they'd serve cooked small potatoes or whatever potatoes they'd got out of the field that were still good, and salted meats that were left over, dried reindeer meat, dried cow meat, whatever they could get that was left that was dried. They would eat this after the meal to settle the texture of the sour cream in your stomach and the fact that you would get acid indigestion or whatever. And then they had flatbread, which is what they would make, a flat flour bread, and it was be laid out flat or rolled out completely flat and baked, and then they would serve that as a bread, and instead of a loaf of bread they'd make this flatbread to serve with it. And it was the big gathering of Saturday night, and what was fun about it is if the whole family could come in because they'd make such a great big pot of it,
Hmm.
and that would be a big Saturday night gathering would be Rumagrit. It's gone on since the old farm days that I recall from my grandparents' days on the farm back in Norway. That went on too. They also did that with rice. They would stir that in with milk for about an hour till the rice was absorbed all the milk and it was pudding texture also, and do the same process. And that was after, well, that was as you got a little bit more money in your coffers. The Rumagrit goes back a lot farther. In fact, I don't know if you've ever seen trolls. They're sitting, a lot of trolls they'll have sitting with a bowl in their lap and a big wooden spoon,
Oh,
because
really?
that's what it had to be stirred with a wooden spoon. You didn't use aluminum or any of those at all. You use a
Yeah.
wooden spoon and you'd stir this pot, and that was their pot of Rumagrit, and it was scarce, so they always had their trolls would eat their grit. And so it goes way back, but Rumagrit is still popular today in the old tradition. You don't see a lot of kids today doing Rumagrit, but you do if they're going to their families' homes or any existing leftover farms that are out there. They'll still do Saturday night Rumagrit.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much
Oh,
for
you're
the insight into
welcome.
this.
If there's any questions I can answer, I'm happy to.